numbers took place in Wyoming, Mississippi, to kind of review how that was
We'd be willing to make any
Yeah, I mean,
adjustment.
of all those events, how many fighters are we, how many
We do
total
12 bouts, 12 bouts, usually per show. I've given a breakdown of every bout, every show.
For sure. So how many total fighters were we talking about?
Well, there's about 24 fighters.
24 fighters.
Yeah.
And that's 24 fighters times how many shows? Just that one show?
Oh, okay, no, I've got, we've.
So how many shows have you had so far?
We've done about 4 or 5 shows so far.
4 or 5 shows, so well over 100 fighters got engaged with the sport itself.
We've had no hospital sends, we've had laceration, broken hand, broken thumb, but we're pretty happy about the results right now.
Yeah.
And like, you know, where that's coming from the New Hampshire, I think even MMA has shown us where that started to where it is now, to where it's been controlled. We're all very aware of not being perceived by the public as putting on some kind of ultimate, you know, thug fight or no holds barred. This is very controlled. Our rules are pretty much right in line with boxing. The bouts are shorter, and we're very aware of safety. So, and again, back to the commission, if you know, you're looking at the way we're doing the hands, if there's adjustments that you need to do, you know, that you want made, we can do that. You know, we're gonna go in line with what the commission says.
Well, I think some first great steps would be, let's see what you can send us from, you know, the fights that have taken place, just kind of, you know, the numbers that we've discussed here.
Yeah, like you can see in here that I just gave you.
Okay. And then
you'll see every bout and what we've done.
And then it would be helpful for us to understand from a practical, you know, from a practical standpoint, how we could actually approve a match.
It's a type of boxing. We're not reinventing any sport.
No, I understand that, but unfortunately, the regs are really detailed about, you know, a boxing, the gloves have to be a certain weight, size, all that's, you know, would need to be reviewed on a match-by-match basis without bare knuckle boxing being specifically approved under your rules in the regs. So that's fine. We've done, you know, other events where we have to issue variances to approve an event outside of the regs, but we have to know specifically what needs to be approved outside of the regs. So that's
I can get that to you, Jim?
easy to execute with some research.
Okay, we can send you as much information. I think you'll find, and give you the names and phone numbers of people to talk to, even the physicians that were ringside.
Yeah.
And we can do that, so you'll get a different point of view than from somebody like myself.
So all the medical requirements are gonna be the same?
Everything is the same, blood work and medicals, and there's no difference there. We're not changing anything.
So it sounds like they'd be licensed as boxers.
Yes, that's what
They need to be licensed as boxers, and then the event itself would be where the variances would be issued.
I see. I mean, are you looking at, not just for a variance, but you're looking at the sport sanctioned, just like the UFC, you know?
Well,
it's sanctioned?
we are sanctioned wherever we go. I mean,
well, no, correct me if I'm wrong, I see that as a difference. I mean, you know, the UFC came to be sanctioned, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, and by that, you know, it meant that they, from that point on, you know, can come back to the state, do more shows, you know, and that's what they did from that point on. And we sat,
probably a bigger hurdle to get sanctioned. So
yes,
I think we start
definitely.
We start with the, you know, altering the regs as needed.
I think that would be, you know, we could put this together and get a show here, you know, sometime in the near future. I think that would be, you know, we could start.
Yeah. I don't think any of us are opposed to that. I think we'll review, let the medical advisory take aboard, figure out how to make that happen. I don't see any major hurdles, but we do have to go.
No, due diligence is important. And I know that there was another similar bare knuckle organization, which is now out of business for a variety of reasons. One, not paying the fighters, paying the officials, and that's not that long ago. So we just want to make that very clear that this is the NFC, Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. The CEO is David Feldman. I will get you all the information you need from the other commissions, so we can, you know, hopefully move this thing forward. And like I said, I'll work with the commission as part of Massachusetts, or independently represent them, so that I can be the conduit to what you need and making sure it's all done. You know, I do it now. I do all the blood work, medicals in a Dropbox, and I send it to our physicians that are doing the fight. So I see step one, I send it there, and, you know, anything beyond that, we just make life easier.
Is there a time frame in what can have your first show, and what time frame is that?
What's that?
And do you have like a set date you're hoping to have this
I'd
out?
love to see a show here at TD in May, if we can,
May.
if we could bring Mount and Connor together.
Mhm.
I'd love to see it, you know.
I'd love to see that too.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to stand in the way of that, that would be a good show, but, so let's do this, let's move the conversation forward into some action steps. So Jen, who would be the point of contact to
Me.
reach out and get, okay, so I think Jen will follow up with you,
Mhm.
request, you know, what we need, and we'll put this on the agenda for our April meeting.
Perfect, and I'll give you Dave Feldman's phone number, the CEO and president, so instead of, you know, you can just get all that right there. I'll tell him what we need, and then you'll be in touch with him. I'll send you his email and contact information, and I'll send him, yours.
Dr. Galivas, do you know when the next medical advisory board meeting is?
March 27th.
March
Thank you,
27th.
Jen.
March 27th. So that's next Wednesday, so maybe that's something we can sneak on, you're gonna take an initial
Absolutely.
look at.
Yeah.
I'll send everything, within the next day or so.
Sounds good.
All right, thank you so much for everybody's time, great seeing everybody.
No, thank
I
you.
get to be all dressed up instead of a black shirt.
You look great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Are we calling Mr. Andy Foster? Okay. Yep. All right,
Are you ready?
I'm ready for you.
Sam, you want to come up? Brian, do you mind if Sam comes up from the, he's from the Rondell Clark?
Yeah, of
Any
course.
questions he has?
Of course.
Hello?
Hi, Mr. Foster? Andy?
Yes.
Hi, this is Jen from the Massachusetts State Athletic Commission. You are on conference call with our board.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me okay? This is Brian Lambert, Commissioner Lambert, acting chair for today. How are you?
I'm good, sir, thank you. Thanks for calling me.
No, thank you for taking the time to speak with us. So you're on speaker, we can all hear you. Do you want to start with your thoughts on the 10-point plan, why we're connecting today?
Well, I mean, my thoughts just on weight cutting and dehydration, severe dehydration in general, is there is no doubt, commissioners, this is the single biggest issue facing mixed martial arts, and it's probably in the top 2 or 3 issues facing boxing. There's no doubt. Every mixed martial arts fighter, with the exception of heavyweights and perhaps less than 1%, cut weight. They all cut weight. I've provided data points. We've got data on about 3,000 athletes. They're all cutting weight, and we have about, I believe it's about 20% that are cutting more than 10%. 10% of your body weight in 24 hours. It's a big problem. I'm glad you guys are taking the time to look at it and to address it, because it's what I told the director last week, and I've told my commissioners this. Commissioners, we regulate a combat sport. I think the general public can accept the possibility that there are going to be accidents and bad things will happen in combat sports in a cage or a ring. I think people generally get that and accept that premise. What is not acceptable, because we answer to the public and we answer with the state that is doing this activity, what is not acceptable to anyone, certainly not acceptable to me, is the danger should not be being able to participate in this activity. Now let's be clear, commissioners, these commissions, my commission, your commission, we regulate the weigh-in. We regulate these contracts, we approve the matches. So when you're telling a fighter, listen, you can fight at welterweight, let's use that weight class, let's call it 170. We should have a fairly decent understanding that this fighter can actually make 170 and not just taking a matchmaker's word for it.
So, you mind if I ask a couple questions?
Absolutely, sir.
So, I've read the 10-point plan, thought a lot about it. It's a subject we're obviously taking serious here in Massachusetts. We're going through a full reg review and incorporating this obviously into that in our conversations. Are you aware with Jody McCormick in Alabama and kind of what the Alabama Athletic Commission did?
I am, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious what your thoughts are there, because obviously the 10-point plan is the 10-point plan. You've adopted it in California. They adopted, I think, roughly 4 of the 10. I mean, what are your thoughts around that?
There's going to be Jody basically has himself and maybe one other staff member. It's limited staff, So when you have limited staff, my thoughts are you do what you can. Okay, the biggest piece of the 10-point plan that I think is just almost the kind of the crux of the rest of the points is the licensing by weight class. Okay? I never had really, I came up in this industry and you just would get a license and you just fight, and if you wanted to change weight classes, you could just change. You go up and down like, people go up and down these weight classes. And the commissions, the regulators, we just kind of go along with that. Well, that's not the way that should be. The doctors, the medical professionals should have a say on whether these athletes can actually compete safely in the weight class that they've chosen. If medical professionals tell the commission this is an okay weight class for this fighter, then that's at least one layer of protection for that fighter that you can rest assured that at least on the point of weight, this fighter is okay to move forward with. So I think Jody did that piece of it. So that's really the big piece of it is you want to have not a ringside physician, not but just a normal, whoever's given the physical, because these people are licensed by the medical board. You want to have your physician certify that this athlete is okay and safe to compete at the weight class. Now, our medical advisory committee actually put on their forms, recommended max walking weight for the physicians to look at. So essentially, if a person's wanting to fight 170 and they come in and they weigh 210, the doctor will have pretty much clearly in front of them that this is not okay for the athletic commission.
Yeah, so
basically 188 or less is okay.
Yeah. So so I'm looking at your license right here. So it says, please specify the lowest weight you intend to compete in. So does that mean someone gets licensed at that weight as their lowest weight, but they can still move up at any point, or do they need to obtain a new license if they move up in weight?
No, they can move up. They can't move down.
Can't move down. Okay.
Yeah, because you typically, I mean, what was it? And we do it in boxing too. It's a little bit different, but I mean, I believe it's Mikey Garcia this weekend. Didn't he move up 2 weight classes to fight Spence? Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so, and he lost the decision, but everybody knows or whatever. But I think everybody can get the fact that it's a little bit easier, especially with the amount of weight these guys are cutting still, to move up. Moving down, especially with mixed martial arts, because of the spreads. I mean, even at the bottom, they're 10-pound spreads. You know what I mean? There's 10-pound spreads, and then you get to 70, and it's a 15-pound spread, and then, you know, it just goes from there. So I think the weight classes are pretty far apart, and even with the adoption of the new weight classes, which absolutely should happen, I mean, and by the way, it's going to happen, whether it happens right now or it happens 10 years from now, but I have a deep suspicion 65 is coming to mixed martial arts. There's just a lot of fighters stuck in that 55 to 70 range. And the guys that are 70 are walking at 90 or better, and the guys that, you know, about 180, you cut to 55, and that's just a normal thing of doing business.
Yep.
And there's a gap there, and I believe that 10-pound increments makes more sense. But that kind of goes to the 0.3.
Yeah, and I would say we agree with you there. We're in agreement on the additional weight classes kind of coming along for everyone.
Do you guys want to talk about the bout agreement at all?
Yeah, go ahead. Dive in.
Well, so you know, I'm sure you're aware, but MMA is paid differently than boxing.
Mm-hmm.
I can go into the history of why that is. That's not relevant. What is relevant is it's paid differently. Boxers are paid a purse. Mixed martial arts are paid a base purse and then a bonus if they win. I've always thought it was to save the commissioners 25% of the overall revenue. So, for example, if a fighter in mixed martial arts, say a fighter in boxing is paid $20,000, that same athlete in mixed martial arts would be paid 10 and 10. 10 to show, 10 to win. Okay, it's the way it works. And, you know, the opponent's something similar. Let's be clear about this. I think it's an important point to remember. Boxing and mixed martial arts are promoted differently. That's why this is important. You have multiple promoters in boxing. You might have, over there on your side, you might have DeBella, and you might have, a Kathy Duga, and you might have lots of different pieces that come together to create a show. In mixed martial arts, the promoter controls both sides of the card. They control the A and the B side. So UFC, when they come in, all those fighters that are fighting in the UFC, they're all UFC fighters. I tell you this because, you know, the bonus and the win is paid like that. So it's considered like that. So what we did was we said that the contract is fined. Basically, you will be fined on the total compensation. What we were seeing happening is there were a few fighters that looked at our weight spreads, they looked at our contract, and they figured things out. They'll let their opponent get drained, cut down real low, and they'll just come in and miss weight by 6 or 7 pounds. They just show up. And then at that point, the promoter kind of puts pressure on the fighter because they need to fight, although it's not like direct pressure. And I'm certainly not talking about the UFC here. I'm talking about just regular club show promoters that need to fight. And the fighter will take it, and then they get beat, and they're paid 20% of their show money, of their base purse, and the guy can walk away with the 20% win bonus because it wasn't part of the original purse. We changed the bout agreement so it was just like in boxing. Total compensation from the purse is what you're fined on. So if you want to pay the bigger game, you'll at least be fined a little bit more from that. Now that's not a whole lot of, if somebody misses weight by 6 or 7 pounds, really, our spreads, and I haven't read your regulations, but I would imagine your spreads would allow that match to move forward. But you really got to think about, is this the appropriate weight class for this fighter if they miss legitimately for 6 or 7, or if they just flat, basically cheated and just didn't even try? just to get an advantage. And paying to be bigger is a real thing.
Okay. Can I, so, separate question. I was just reviewing the application. So there's a lot of, I mean, there's just some kind of some notes on here about all the different weight classes and kind of education around physical stuff. What are you guys doing outside of that, like general fighter education in the community? Can you kind of talk to us quickly about that outside of the 10-point plan?
We have a whole lot of like brochures that we have at weight classes. We have a couple videos that we put up. We actually have one of our videos got a whole lot of hits. That's basically the extent of what we've been doing. Is we've just been trying to pass out educational brochures on it, these types of things. But what we're trying to do is ultimately change the culture. And I'm in the middle of a research study with a major university right now that's taking our data, because if I can show, and right now I've not been able to show, but if I can show that you're statistically more likely to lose the fight if you engage in this nonsense, then at least I'll have a leg up that I can go back to trainers and these type of people and say, look, this not only is it not healthy, which is the first and foremost point, but it's not giving you a competitive advantage. In fact, it's giving you a competitive disadvantage, statistically speaking. If I can show that, I think that will be the first move towards trying to change what the trainers believe is happening, because no athlete likes to cut weight, but the athlete and their trainers are caught up in this idea that if they cut all this weight, they'll have some competitive advantage. The problem is their opponent knows it as well, and his trainer and her trainer knows it also. So it's like this race to the bottom. So not only do we have a fight competition, a combat sports competition, we have a competition the day before on who can cut the most. So you got two competitions. You got a weigh-in competition, and then you've got who can rehydrate the best. That's a competition. By the way, we banned IV rehydration over here. We got rid of that. My doctors and I'm of the opinion that if you need an IV to rehydrate from a weight cut, you're not in the right weight class, and you shouldn't be competing the next day in a combat sports competition if you need a medical IV to rehydrate yourself.
Yeah, how do you monitor that? You can go to like IV bars for a couple $100s now at most major cities.
Sure. One of the ways that you monitor it is tough, and it's a great question. But the fighters, they have loose lips, and they'll tattle. They just tell on each other, and the trainers will tell, and they'll come in and they'll say, we had one last week. I won't mention the name, but a real super high profile fighter. They asked Amy, can we do, the promoter asked Amy that he wants to do the IV rehydration. So I sent him the reg that says he couldn't, and we checked. So, just to make sure that they know that that's not an option for them coming in. And then look, it's hard to check. It's hard to check. It's hard to enforce. But having it out there in regulation that this is not allowed is better than not having it there.
Yep. Okay.
My name's Michael Paul there with Cage Titans. Andy, I just had a quick question. When you were talking about the weight cutting and the responsibility of the matchmaker presenting to the athletic commission and them having some responsibility for presenting a certain weight class, what responsibility do you guys put on the trainers themselves? Because as a matchmaker, promoter, former fighter myself, you know, we get fed this information from a trainer who is licensed in this state. They should have some responsibility that they're projecting an actual weight that their fighter can make, because many of the times we're taking their word on it, and if they're licensed through Massachusetts, how do you guys handle that?
Well, I mean, you know, you're going to have a database already for your Massachusetts fighters of what their physical says right now. Jen can go back and pull lots of data on these people, and then you can pull what they weighed at the weigh-in, okay? And I don't know if you guys weighed them the second day, but if you don't, you should start. That way you can start tracking this information. But dealing with the trainers, you've just got to come under the idea that if a matchmaker calls, there's very few fighters that are going to tell the matchmaker they can't make the weight that's been proposed, okay? Now, let's be clear about this. That likelihood of a decline of a fight offer decreases significantly with the amount of the purse that's offered and the promotion that's offered. So if a major promotion comes, that fighter is going to say that they can make the weight no matter what, really. I mean, if it's within reason, then that trainer is going to try to help them make it. So one of the things that we do, especially on those real high-profile fights that get advertised and you've got a lot of public interest, I wish I could do it on everybody. We don't have the bandwidth on it. But we try to get our own weight check on these fighters. We'll Skype them, we'll do something, and people, you know, it causes a bit of inconvenience for the fighter, and they don't like it. You know, some of them don't mind, but they don't like it. But I think everybody understands why it happened. You know, and the reason that we started doing that is I had UFC 177 out here. I believe that was the number. I'm going to tell you wrong. It was scheduled Hannah Morale versus Dillashaw. And I had two fighters on that card the day of the weigh-in get pulled off and hospitalized, and one of them was my main event. So then I have to figure out the methods and the regulations on refund of tickets if a main event's canceled. And you know, you have a UFC pay-per-view where we're having to issue, you know, the promoters issuing refunds and these types of things. It was just a really, that's what really kind of perked perked me up about weight cutting and what this can do. And I started like doing all these studies on it. The trainer is going to facilitate the fighter. So I don't think that the trainer is the best gauge on whether this fighter can make this weight or not. I really think that doctor, who's often not part of this industry, most always not part of it, saying if this fighter can safely make that, and then you have a baseline on what this fighter actually was 60 or 90 days out or whenever they go and take their physical. And then you can start tracking it. If Jen gets somebody who's proposed at welterweight and that fighter's 210, they're 40 pounds over, so let's give them the pounds, so they're 39 over. Well, if they've got 39 to cut, you know, Jen's able to take it to the commission or to the medical doctors or whoever reviews your physicals and says, is this okay? And most likely at 39 pounds, I guess it would depend on the time period, but you've got to look at it and probably they're going to say, no, this is too much. And then Jen can go back to the matchmaker and say, look, the doctors won't do it at 70. Do you want to do a catch weight? And by the way, let's talk about catch weights for a second. What is wrong with catch weight, these spreads? You know, I have my guys do catch weights all the time, my matchmakers, because the doctors just won't go along with some of the because we got the weight, you know, we have the information now. And I think the information is the key for the commission being able to regulate this properly, because if you have the information, you now know. And if you know, I think that's half of this, and you're able to make better decisions. To answer your question directly, I think the trainers have some degree of responsibility, but they're not going to, you know, their job is to help that fighter. I think the cultural change is what we need to help with the trainers and stuff, because I don't think they're going to, you know, and I don't want to paint everybody with a broad brush, but I don't think their interest isn't to cancel fights.
I think Andy, Michael, again, in the UFC level, and I think some of the bigger promotions, I'm thinking more at the club level. You know, as a matchmaker, many of the times, the question just goes right out to the schools. Hey, we have a show April 6th. What fighters do you have at what weight classes? And that's the information we get provided by these trainers / managers / coaches. And I think that you bring up a very good point on some of the larger scale fights. If I'm calling up TJ Dillashaw and say, I got a last minute replacement, you need to make 135 in 3 weeks. Yes, there's not some responsibility there. I'm talking more on the club level that you called it. You know, that's how the matchmaking process goes out here. The schools and the trainers are providing us, all right, I got Joe Leonard at 155 pounds for April 6th. Let me know who you got. I don't think that there's as much strong arming on the local level or the club level fitting these guys into weight classes. And I think that here in Massachusetts, we don't have the UFC often. So I think that we're trying to clean up. I can't speak for the commission, but I'd like to see us try to clean up the local level, so to speak.
And I appreciate that. So we have lots of both kinds out here. We have lots of club shows and lots of the big ones. And you know, it's the same process though, because you're exactly right. They call the gym. They say we need a 170 or a 155, and they'll say, okay, we got this guy or this guy. Well, now either the person has a license or they don't. Okay, if they have a license, you'll have a weight on what they were at least fairly recently. And let me just say this: if they have a license that's old, that's like, let's say 9 months old, they will usually have fought on that license, because often these fighters get these licenses to compete right away. They don't typically, they're not like other professions where they just renew these things over and over in perpetuity. They usually get the license in order to compete. And so you will have a recent weight on that fighter, or they won't have a license, which is often the case on these last minute replacements. And you'll be able to send them to the doctor, and then you'll have a real weight on them. So if they propose it at 70, if you send them to the physician right away to get their physical, which I'm maybe, I don't know if the physical is part of the licensing process in Massachusetts. I'm talking about the physical part, not the pre-fight, the medical physical. But if it is, then you'll get you a weight on that fighter right then, and that way you'll know.
Okay. Yeah, Doctor.
Yes, good morning. This is Dr. Edgar Bolinas, and pleasure having you speak on one of the state's ringside positions. I've been doing this for, oh gosh, I think 12 plus years now, something like that, more, probably 15. And working my way up through boxing, and the UFC was sanctioned here several years ago, and been involved with that aspect of the sport as well. And it's always entertaining from the perspective of providing safety, you know, to the sport with regards to all these ideas of how to look at weight cutting and what to do about the, you know, the dramatics of it, because obviously, you know, it invokes a lot of morbidity and mortality, and sad to say that mortality did show it rear its ugly head here about 2 years ago with an amateur mixed martial art fighter who did drastically cut weight, and unfortunately, despite hospitalization immediately, and despite significant IV hydration and whatnot, he didn't come around. And he did have an underlying issue as well. He had sickle cell trait, which mixed into the factor as well, and which actually is guiding us into suggesting that sickle cell trait, be also part of an application as to a fighter having it or not having it. I find it a question directed to you with regards to your regulations is that recently, when I say recently, I believe would be in the neighborhood of the fall of last year, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was a fighter out of Massachusetts, Danny O'Connor, who was main event for one of your shows in California, and who did actually some significant weight cutting because it prompted him to actually go to the hospital, and I think he was there for 24 hours, and he had to undergo some significant rehydration. Since he presented to your state as a fighter, how did he sort of slip through the cracks, if you will, with your 10-point type of system? Wasn't he someone that should have been caught, so to speak, and not, therefore, get himself involved, with the significant weight cut that he wound up doing, which then led to cancellation of the fight, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, he was a main event fighter for your show in California. Can you make some comments?
He was the main event guy.
Yes, sir.
He was the main event guy, and I remember talking to Bob Arum about that when it got canceled.
Right.
And I'm actually looking at his file right now, and I'm going to tell you how that got through. We have a provision in our rules that allows us to take out-of-state physicals.
Mm-hmm.
We took his out-of-state physical. We didn't get our read on him, and it was we probably we learned us a pretty good lesson from that one.
Mm-hmm.
Is on these type of fights, we're not going to take an out-of-state physical that's that old. Now he didn't. He had fought lower than that the fight before. And I'm on memory here because I'm not, but he had, when I was looking at that fight, it seems like he had been proposed or he had fought lower than that the fight before that. So it wasn't like we didn't think that it was going to be, an issue because, I don't want to tell you wrong, it seems like it was Ramirez he was going to fight. I don't want to tell you wrong, but it seems like it. And, he had made the weight lower the fight before than what he was proposed at. It didn't raise any eyebrows over here.
Mm-hmm.
And we took an out-of-state physical, which we learned as a lesson. So if you're wondering how he got through, that's kind of the piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, you said earlier that obviously the physicians, the doctors, should have responsibilities and so forth. I mean, here in our state, a physical exam is good for a full year. Is that correct, John? Correct. Full year.
Correct.
So that being said, I mean, if we took a physical exam from a fighter that was from 10 months ago, I mean, that weight obviously on that thing could be quite significant versus a weight that a doctor will have to see, again, on a physical that you're referring to, maybe 6 or 8 weeks before the fight. So in other words, that fighter's physical that he had, or she had, could still be good, but months prior, but within that 12-month period. So it sounds like you're suggesting that a fighter undergo another physical to catch another weight somewhere in the neighborhood of like 8 weeks prior to an event, which is fine. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love to have them get weights every month, you know, for a full year, so we can really follow, you know, what their weights are all about. But of course, you know, it's logistically not going to happen. So what do? We thought about this ourselves here, and we're emphasizing the educational aspect of it. And I think we heard from Mike Colbert earlier with regards to the trainers. I think these fighters, you know, with their trainers, could give us this additional information and almost put it in their license, you know, part of their licensing to be a trainer, you know, that they take a course or the videos that you were referring to, which I would love to have, by the way, educating them on the dangers of significant weight cutting, and let them be the ones who can document, you know, weights prior to, you know, events. That would incorporate even more information for us. All right, go ahead, sir.
Doctor, you're exactly right about what you said.
Thank you.
A 10-month physical is not going to do a lot of help for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we learned that with the narrative that we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the second day weigh-in, and they're an in-state fighter, they're one of your fighters, not coming from out of state, or you know, if they're a New England fighter,
right,
and you've got a weight on that fighter. So, for example, if they fought 10 months ago, or if they got a license 10 months ago, most of the time they will have fought on that license. I think everybody in your commission would agree with that. So they get a license, they typically get the license to fight. So they fought. If you'll weigh them when they get to the venue, obviously you've got the weigh-in weight because you weighed them. Ask the promoter to bring the same scale that was weighed the same day, and whether you guys have a drug testing protocol or not, just when they show up, just ask your inspector, have them take their shoes off and hop on the scale and just record the weight really quickly. And you'll just write it down. And that way you're able to track the difference between their weigh-in and what they weighed. And if they're one of these people that have gained a significant amount, I had this Bellator the other day, 18%. If they're one of these people that has gained a lot of weight overnight, then you're able to flag that person for future bouts. You could have Jen Skype them for a future bout. You could ask for a new physical. You could. Right. There's a lot of options, but it's up to you, doctor. Your ringside physician. It'd be up to you to make that decision on whether this fighter can compete at this weight class safely in the future. Because basically, staff. I'm staff from my commission. Jen, your staff. It's just up to us to provide you the information, and you make the medical decision.
And that's where you reference kind of the 30-day and the 10-day weight check-in. Just kind of, it may not be, you know, it can be manipulated, as you say here, and it may not always be accurate, but at least it's a point of contact with the fighter that they know is coming, so they're a little more in tune to it.
100%. I mean, we saw, like I had, you know, the WBC did this. This wasn't my deal. I just took it from the WBC, but we had a guy that fought Triple G a few years ago. He missed weight. I don't know, pretty significantly on fight day. He ended up losing, but on the weigh-in day he missed weight. But he had made the marks on the 30, and he had completed those checks. You know what I mean? So that box was checked on that piece of it. Sean Porter just fought over here a couple weeks ago, you know, and you might have saw that. He had to cut his hair to make the weight, but he had made weight. We've got his weights from where he was coming down from the DC, so we kind of knew where he was coming. But you know, being able to track that weight is incredibly helpful, I think, for making sure that these fighters are fighting appropriately. Let me explain. What you don't want to have happen, and this is what's happening far, far too often, is these guys are not cutting the weight the correct way. Like, it's not gradually coming down. We know that there's going to be weight cutting through dehydration. I don't think anybody's confused about that. But you want to see a gradual decrease to get to a point, as opposed to just showing up on fight week and then suddenly trying to cut 20 or 30 pounds through water in 2 or 3 days. I know you commissioners have saw these guys are carrying around these gallons of water on fight week. I'm sure you guys have saw that. They're just chugging it. Okay, they're doing this thing called water loading, and I'm sure your physician can better explain it. But somehow or another, it throws the kidneys into overdrive, and you'll lose a lot of weight doing that stuff. That kind of practice isn't super healthy, according to my doctors. And that's kind of what we're trying to avoid, is you can see the gradual decline, and the medical professionals can make the call. And if the call is, this fight's okay, just not at this weight, then you guys can tell the matchmakers, and they can renegotiate this. They can do it with a pen.
So this is very helpful for us. As I said, it's great timing because we're doing a reg review and weight cutting and all these provisions that you're discussing and sharing with us. We're, you know, considering everything for part of our reg changes. Related to that, so the sickle cell issue. So we did unfortunately have a fighter, Rondell Clark, pass away 2 years ago due to complications from weight cutting, dehydration, and he had the sickle cell trait. Something that has come up in conversation is adding a sickle cell blood test requirement. Any thoughts on that? Just curious to get your kind of thoughts.
I don't know enough. I'm actually interested to know and following what your commission is going to do on that issue. You know, I think I don't have a, you know, I'm learning from your commission on that issue, and it may be something that we have to adopt, you know, out here as well, because it sounds to me like that absolutely should be looked at, certainly as it relates to weight cutting and these type of things in general. So yeah, I'm honestly just waiting to see what happens, and I'm gonna talk to my physicians about that.
Okay, I appreciate that. We respect your opinion, so you know, maybe we have open lines of communication as we go through the process.
Can I ask one more question? Hi Andy, this is Sam Silverman from the Rondell Clark Foundation. One thing that has come up a decent amount during these discussions as the Commission considers regulation changes is the logistical and practical kind of burden or implications of making some of these regulation changes. So since you have actually implemented this and lived through it for a couple of years now, can you speak to the kind of logistical lift or practical requirements that have had to take place in order to monitor these regulations with regards to the 10-point plan?
It's logistically hard. Okay, I mean, sir, there's not another way for me to say it. It's created a lot more work for my staff. It's created, I mean, there's more work involved. but that's what it takes. I don't, you know, I think having the information early helps us to make better regulatory decisions on these fights, because, and I wanna say this, because this is an important piece. There's three big pieces that affect combat sports safety. I feel like weight cutting is the number one issue. Drug testing and use of anabolic substances and performance enhancers, that's another problem. And then the third problem is concussions and neurological health. I would suggest to the commissioners and to you, sir, from the foundation, that these three different points are not independent from each other. I feel like they're connected together in many cases. Like, I've had multiple fighters tell me, Wendy, I cut weight. I mean, I took this drug to help me with the weight cut so I wouldn't lose the mass and I could recover better and all this type of stuff. And then, you know, I don't have data myself. My doctors seem to think it, and they've talked about it at length. But there is, you know, the brain dehydrates last. It keeps its fluid pretty good. But my doctors seem to think that dehydration, severe dehydration in concussions are somewhat, or maybe I should say brain injury or you know, brain trauma are sort of connected together. Now, that I don't have data that I can point to that shows that. The doctors may, but I don't. But they seem to think all these things are connected. And I know the first two are connected. I've had it happen too many times. To answer your question, sir, logistically for the staff, yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's harder, but it's what it takes. And, you know, if what it takes to protect these fighters, look, you know, I mean, we did 159 pro shows last year and several hundred amateur shows through entities. It just, you know, it's just what it's going to take. And, yeah, I do it. Yeah, it's not logistically easy. It's going to be an administrative burden, but if you can do the physical piece of it, which will get the doctor to sign off on it, that piece is not any more difficult. And that way your commission at least knows, is this weight class reasonable for this fighter? And if you can establish that, I think that's a long way in you know, having people Skype and having your inspectors run specific gravity tests, which is not hard, it's just a dipstick, but doing all these different things, that takes staff and training and all this different things. If you can't do all the points, I think your guys, I mean, you're on this call, you're doing a rate change, I think you're absolutely doing, you know, you're doing what you can to protect your athletes.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys got anything? Yeah.
Yeah, just
Go ahead, please.
Sorry, back to Bolinas again. Yeah, I can agree more with regards to what you said about those three factors. And the PED, what do you folks in California, are you using USADA's type of tox screens for checking on that? Or, I mean, there's other organizations out there too. Water, I believe, is one. And what specifically have you guys been using out there for the physical enhancing drug testing?
So we do lots and lots of drug tests in California.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think we did 600 or 700 tests last year. Okay. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that I run 600 or 700 tests at UCLA using a World Anti-Doping Agency panel. Okay. I did maybe about 100 of those. Now it's an estimate, something like that. Okay. I tell you that because what we do is we buy the $6-7 pop test. Okay, the little kit. you collect the urine and then you press them, and you will know if the fighter's on drugs of abuse. They don't do PEDs, but they'll do drugs of abuse. We use lots and lots of those. We run through those, lots of those. And, you know, if you have a hit on that, you can't, you need to have lab verification, so we'll send it off to a lab that we contract with to verify that the kit's right. But that's mainly what we do. We work with USADA some, you know, we can talk offline about USADA, and we work with them. They work with UFC. They're the UFC's exclusive anti-doping partner. I work with Dr. Goodman from VADA. Also, a lot of times what I'll do is, if I have a drug testing failure, and I actually widely report it in the press, I'm not telling you anything that's not out there in the press, but we have a UFC fighter who, I mean, absolutely, a supplement caused his failure. There's no doubt about it. He had the supplement tested, the whole bit. So I put him in the VADA program, and I gave him a lesson suspension because he went into the VADA program. Okay? So in the voluntary anti-doping agency program, as long as he passes that, he'll come off suspension in 4 months, and he can go back to making a living. So we work with Dr. Goodman's group. We work with USADA from time to time. My inspectors are trained, quite a few of them, as doping control officers, so we do a lot of it ourselves because, you know, UCLA is here. It's one of the 2 World Anti-Doping Agency laboratories. And actually, our amateur program, CAMO, actually just recently, it may not be done, but they're finishing up their contract with Smyrtle, the lab in Salt Lake, the other World Anti-Doping Agency lab. Dr. Daniel Eichner is the head of that, and they're going to be doing some drug testing at the amateur level with them. But if you know, when I was in Georgia, because I used to run the Georgia Commission for 5 years, and now I'm out here, the budgetary concerns are much different. Like in California, I have a much larger drug testing budget. In Georgia, I didn't have as big a drug testing budget. So what I would suggest is, depending on how much resources the commission wants to spend on drug testing, if you don't want to spend $300 and $400 a test through a World Anti-Doping Agency program, you might want to spend $6 or $7 each kit. Train your inspectors up on that, because that will create deterrence. I saw it, it works, and if fighters know they're getting tested, you will see a decrease in the number of not just drugs of abuse, but also performance-enhancing drugs, because fighters, you always reserve the right to send that to the lab.
Makes sense.
So you wouldn't pull that fighter just off the urine test until it gets back to the lab and verified?
It depends on what it is, sir. It's a great question. If it's marijuana, we don't pull them. We just don't. And here's the reason why. The POP test, their thresholds are 20 nanograms per milliliter. The World Anti-Doping Agency threshold is 150 nanograms per milliliter. So if they hit on a POP test, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to hit in the lab. Okay? And it doesn't, you know, you gotta, you know, our rules require lab verification. So what I do is, in situations like that, is I go to the doctor and I'll say, listen, we got a problem here. This guy's hit. They'll say, he or she'll say, what did he hit for? And I'll tell them, and they'll go back and check him out and say, no, he's good to go. That's only on marijuana. If it's the other ones, we had one once on cocaine. The first POP test hit, I got another one on him, the second POP test hit, and I just made the executive call, we're not running this fight. Now, my rules required verification. We verified it. Everything was okay, but I didn't want somebody that was actively had cocaine metabolites in their system. I didn't want them competing in combat sports. That was a call I made, but for all intents and purposes, most of our hits out here are marijuana, THC, and we typically run those fights they hit on a pop test, because the fine is not even much money out here, and their doctors don't consider it to be a PED.
When are your inspectors, sorry, it's Commissioner Lambert again, when are your inspectors conducting that test? Like day of the fight, day of the weigh-in?
Yeah, it's a great question. You can't do it at the weigh-in because they don't have any urine to give us, okay? So, I mean, it's true. We're talking about weight cutting, but it's true, okay? So, if you're going to do drug testing, you have to do it, and when I say have to, I mean, you can do whatever you'd like to, but it's my opinion. You have to do it when they show up for their fight, okay? And what we do is we have a scale right there in the middle, right when they show up, and they'll show up, they'll hop on the scale, we'll get their weight, they'll go to the doping control room, we'll get their urine sample, and then we'll escort them and show them to their locker room. And that's the way it works.
Okay.
If you do it after the fight, and some places do it after the fight, here's been my experience with that. I have personal experience with this issue. If you have a fighter that you suspect is on a PED or a substance, if you wait till after the fight, one or two things is going to happen. Either that fighter isn't on anything and they're going to take a really, really long time to urinate if the fight's been a long time because they've got dehydrated during the course of the athletic competition. Or, I saw this happen before, and I don't know if the fighter was on it or not. I don't have any idea. But when we want to get it, I saw some severe headaches appear to where the doctors had to use the ambulance. And then what I can tell you unequivocally, commissioners, is if you send an inspector to the hospital to try to collect a urine sample for a patient, they won't let you in there. You lose jurisdiction. You can't. It's not happening. And so I would suggest that you do it when they arrive at the venue.
Yep.
Is that a random selection of your fighters?
It is, sir.
Okay. Can I ask two more quick questions? We appreciate your time. This is Michael with Cage Titans again. One might be quick. Have you come up with a solution for PED testing on the local level, where cost obviously comes into play on the club level?
I have not. What we do is, drug testing is expensive. We all know that. What we do is, if you're going to test, one of the things that will save money on if you're going to test for PEDs at the local level is we use a pop test, and we'll pop it for the drugs of abuse side. So so that way you're only testing for PEDs. So when you send it to the lab, instead of paying like $413 for a full panel, you may be getting it for $212, something like that. So that'll save you some money there, and you can do twice as many. But yeah, testing everybody with performance enhancing drugs, at least for this commission, is just not feasible. You can't do it. You have to do a random selection. But we do test our club shows at some degree of frequency so that the athletes are aware that at least it exists.
Yeah. So, Michael, again, with Cage Titans, my next question, because that was a good one, because obviously they know they're going to get tested at the highest level if they make the UFC, but on their way up, they know they can abuse performance-enhancing drugs to get that edge, to get them there. There's a big money payoff, so I think it's important at the club level. My next question, and my last question, has to do with weight cutting. Obviously, we're here with Rondell Clark and the tragedy that was him. Has your research or adopting this 10-point must system brought up any concerns about how many times you make a specific weight within a given time frame? I say this because Rondell, on his his physical with his paperwork, he was 190 pounds, which is only about 11% out from his fight weight. But he did fight twice within a 2-month period at that weight class. So have you had any research that has looked into that?
When I get my research back from the university, I'll be happy to share it. I'll provide it to Jen, and she'll provide it to all of you guys if you'd like to see it. What I can tell you is I don't have research that shows that just yet. Here's what I can tell you anecdotally, because I regulate a lot of fights, and this is what I think you guys are going to follow this line of thinking. Fighters, you know, and I'm not speaking specifically to Rondell Clark situation. I'm talking about fighters in general. As fighters age, it becomes more difficult for them to lose the weight. Now that's kind of a blanket statement. There's something I've noticed. Certainly in lower weight classes, it becomes more difficult for them to lose the weight down. And so if you have a fighter who's been consistently struggling to make a particular weight, as they get older, it's typically not getting better. It's typically getting worse. So it's probably time to look at a weight class adjustment, especially if they've had trouble for the last couple of times making it. Bet they're not making it again. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Do you have something?
No, I was just going to say thank you for his time.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time, Mr. Foster. We might follow up with you with some questions as we move forward on this topic, if that's okay.
Sir, you and Jen and your commission can call anytime. I appreciate talking with you, and I really appreciate the fact that you're looking at this issue, because this issue is the problem in combat sports right now.
No, we agree, and we are trying to take it very seriously. So, again, we appreciate your time, and we will be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Have a good morning.
It's a morning out there.
8 o'clock.
All right. Subcommittee regulation review update.
Sure. This is just an update of what we reviewed at the last subcommittee meeting. Up for debate. I'm just going over the highlights suggestions that we made. We reviewed section 13 through 19. 1302. Recommendation was adjust select MMA weight classes as follow. Welterweight 155 to 165. Middleweight 165 to 175. Super middleweight 175 to 185. That's a new weight class. Light heavyweight 185 to 195. Cruiserweight 195 to 225. That is a new weight class. And then heavyweight 225 to 265. 1303, add language from 1304, allowing the commission to order weigh-ins at any time. 1304-2, remove section on weight loss. This is an unarmed combatant who fails to make weight shall be given up to 1 hour after the weigh-in to lose a maximum of 2 pounds. 1306, add language clarifying the forfeited money goes to the opponent. 1402, add language banning the following: exposed zippers, nothing below knees, no knee braces, no exposed Velcro. 1404, there was no changes, but we were going to have the medical advisory board review it. And then 1606, add clarify definitions of TKO and KO, possibly adopt boxing definition. And that's it.
Thank you. And Jen, we're going to follow up separately for the next date. Okay, thank you. Review upcoming events. Any comments on the upcoming events? Jen, anything of note? Anything? All right. Any matters not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of the meeting? Yes.
Michael Paul there at Cage Titans. I want to bring to light some upsetting information that I came aware of this past weekend at an event. It might have already been brought up, but there was a promotion that tried to put on a fight between a 20-10 professional fighter and an 0-3 fighter. This fight was passed by the Athletic Commission, which is scary to the standard that we're upholding these promotions to. You know, in the past, if there was fights of this magnitude that got brought up to the commission, we would have to come in front of them as matchmakers to get these fights approved. Then that kind of went away, and it became standard practice that we'd have to write a justification on all the fights that we proposed to the Athletic Commission. And now the standard is we just put a fight card in. I kind of strongly caution that if this is the way we're going, where these fights we just send a fight card and it gets approved, no questions asked, and then we're brought to the carpet when we look for our renewal, these mismatches that are grossly happening are going to end up happening for a year before we address it. I think it needs to be addressed at the time and when the fight cards are put forward. The fight didn't happen, so we're lucky and we avoided it here. But we approved the matchups. Andy Foster said it. We're the commission. We approve these matchups. And something needs to be done. In addition to that, I think that a full investigation should happen into the whole surroundings of this fight happening. There is information that came out. I only know this because Rob Fuller, one of the fighters in question, he's fought for me before, and he's speaking to some local MMA media. But the practices that went on behind the scenes of making this fight was unethical. I started this promotion, Cage Titans, 9 years ago because of the reputation that promoters had of being shady, unethical. And to see this going on under our eyes here in Massachusetts is upsetting. AMMO as a promotion should be held accountable, the matchmaker and the promoter. It was basically, you make your own fight to the fighter, and we'll just put it on our card. One of the fighters, Saul Almeida, he paid for the flight for the fighter, he paid the purse for the fighter. These are just unethical things that are going on, and we're allowing it to happen. And I think that it should be brought to light. Somebody's got to speak up and bring it to your attention and let you guys do your job of investigating on all sides of what went down with this. And I think that we should also look into the process of how fights are approved. If we give you a fight card and something doesn't pass the smell test, bring it to our attention. I've come before this commission before and had to explain why I thought a 10-0 guy should fight a 3-6 guy. And I welcome that. I welcome that challenge to bring it to your attention why I think that fight should happen. If we're just letting this happen just by passing in a piece of paper and approving it, it's a scary situation because already this weekend I've had 3 schools that are fighting on my card call me up and said, take all those matchups off the table. I want a 0-3 guy. I want a 0-5. The Athletic Commission will approve it. I'm not fighting that tough guy anymore. And then how's it look for us in Massachusetts? We're trying to do the right thing and take the right steps. But this practice has to be looked into. So, thank you.
Nope. Appreciate your comments, and I think as you noted, the fight was pulled. That was because it was brought to our attention, so it's something we're taking serious, and we were aware. So
yeah, I think that the word out is the fight got pulled because of stitches in a finger, and which there's a whole level of cover up between the promoter and the fighter. Hey, cover it up, I'll cut the stitches out the day of the fight. There's a whole other level to that. But we got lucky that the kid had stitches in his finger because I questioned, and you don't have to answer, no one has to answer me, but if that kid didn't have stitches in his finger, would that fight been pulled? Would have it been pulled? And if it got all the way to that point, it shouldn't have got to that point, so hopefully we'll look at it some more.
well, thanks. No, I appreciate you coming before us. You're a promoter.
Yeah.
Glad for all you do here in Mass, so thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Motion to adjourn at 12:39 p.m.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.